they should, hypothetically, have reasonable suspicion to detain you and to start an investigation about whether or not you're committing that offense.
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about whether you should keep your NFA tax stamp with your items, what you should do with the original, what if you have a trust, how this is affected by state law. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And to start things off, to answer that first initial question, Emily, do you need to keep your NFA tax stamp with your NFA items?
You do, actually. So says the Code of Federal Regulations. So it is very specific. We have 27 CFR 479.101E, which states, a person possessing a firearm registered to him, and of course we're talking about NFA firearms here. We're talking about short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, fully automatic weapons, AOWs, potentially zip guns, if anyone's still out there registering your potato gun.
Suppressors.
Your suppressors, of course. Firearm registered to him shall retain proof of registration, which shall be made available to any ATF officer upon request. And of course, practically speaking, virtually every state has an NFA equivalent law on their books, which also makes it a state crime to possess one of these items not registered with the federal government. And so practically speaking, under your state law, if you want to not be arrested for the unlawful possession of one of these items, you should in fact have your documents with you to show to any state law enforcement as well.
Now, the question that comes up from here is, do you carry the original or just a copy? And prudence dictates you should carry a copy.
Yeah, there's nothing that says you have to have your original with you. Keep that locked in a safe in your house. Definitely don't have that in your glove box because you're bringing your suppressor out with you.
Just talking to folks and meeting folks out on the range who have these things, laminated copies inside the cases. Let's say you have a 2-stamp, short barrel rifle with a suppressor. Keeping a copy of the tax stamp in the rifle case that you travel with. That's not a bad idea, but copies, maybe laminated, not necessary.
Right.
Just needs to be legible.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say, though, because I know people are asking this in their heads right now. What about a photo of said tax stamp? As criminal defense attorneys, we will tell you, no. Although that would satisfy, I think, this requirement in the CFR, because, you have essentially your little digital replica. And we are always going to tell you, anytime you are not handing your cell phone over to law enforcement to prove a point, you're having a good day. So it's always better. And I know most of us are very, very law abiding, but it's something that would happen that you would hand your cell phone over to law enforcement and you would get some sort of text that implicates you in some other offense. And, it just is, while the officers look at your phone, just don't hand your phone over to law enforcement unless they have a warrant for your phone. So I would suggest not taking a photo as your proof to hand to law enforcement. If you want a photo on your phone just for your records, by all means.
Yeah, and that goes to a good point, saying, oh, I have a photograph of this on my phone. That could be probable cause to dump and search a phone. And so everything that's on the phone could become fair game at that point. To Emily's point, not probably a good idea. Now, the second thing that comes up is we have this kind of spectrum of state laws when it comes to the criminalization of National Firearms Act items. And they kind of range from, hey, the state will presume that you're legal to you're presumed to be in unlawful possession of the item unless you have this documentation. So how does that come up practically?
So let's go first to the world in which it is a state crime to possess the item. You have an affirmative defense or an exception to that crime that it is in fact registered. Well, in that case, let's say that a state law enforcement officer sees you in possession of a suppressor. They should, hypothetically, have reasonable suspicion to detain you and to start an investigation about whether or not you're committing that offense, because baseline possession is illegal with an exception. Mm-hmm. So they could potentially detain you, ask to see your tax stamp, or even just arrest you and let the affirmative defense play out later.
Right.
Now, I think that's probably unlikely to happen, but still, you're going to be detained. There are other states, in fact, Texas is one of them, in which this possession crime on the state level is actually dual faceted. So there's 2 steps, 2 elements to the criminal act itself. Element 1, that you are in possession of. Element 2, an item that is unregistered, right? So let's back up. I know that sounds like what we just said. So in the states that are more restrictive, the crime is possession. An exception or an affirmative defense to said crime is
It's a tax stamp.
tax stamp. Some states, the crime is unregistered possession. Now, why does that make a difference? I know that you probably think that this is word salad right now, but I promise it makes a difference. If the crime is not possession, but the crime is unregistered possession, full stop, then an officer sees you with your suppressor. The officer must have reasonable suspicion, not that you are in possession of the item, but that you are in possession of the item and that it is unregistered. And so, short of you, waltzing around saying, I have this without a tax stamp, I don't see them having that reasonable suspicion to detain you.
Yeah, unless, you have a video of yourself manufacturing the item or, and there's no indication that there's been an opportunity that you obtain pre-authorization or maybe you made it on the fly out at the range itself.
Ooh, fun hypothetical. We didn't discuss this ahead of time. What if it is just so clearly a homemade hunk of junk? Is that enough to give an officer in said state reasonable suspicion that it is unregistered? I mean, it's made out of a...
let's say you have the oil filter that you screw onto the end of the gun, but there's no hole in it until you pull the trigger. Yeah, that's probably gonna be, it's gonna be, you're making a suppressor theoretically, and have you had time to register it? And those states where it's, the two-step, that probably would fall under probable cause.
I mean, I wouldn't test it, but it's interesting that, you got your soda bottle, right?
Sure.
I mean, is an officer just looking at your soda bottle? Is he like, I have reasonable suspicion that this doofus doesn't have a tax stamp? And yeah, I mean, it's going to go through the court system, but I would say probably.
Yeah. And the last question that comes up are, let's say the item is held in a NFA firearms trust, and we have frequently asked questions of that. We'll have that linked in the description below if you have questions about those. But do you need to carry your trust documents with you?
Yes, you should, in fact, carry your trust documents as well, particularly if, let's say, you have a co-trustee who is also allowed to be in possession. You want to be able to prove whoever you are under the trust that you are, in fact, allowed to possess that weapon.
Yeah, so because the tax stamp itself, it'll have the name of the trust. It'll be the Taylor Family Trust. Well, you need to have that legal entity with you to show, hey, I'm one of those designated persons on the Taylor Family Trust, so that you can stay in compliance with the law. But we hope you enjoy this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please continue to question and comment below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys. What's the worst experience your clients had with a phone dump? Because it's bad, right? I mean, it's like, it's not like they're just dumping the portion of the phone that relates to the...
No, yeah. When you have a bunch of sexting photographs, the volume of the number of nude photographs is the part that upset me.
I have never... Gross. I have never had a client get their phone dumped where there have not been just so many naked photos. And it's like, if you, how happy is your wife that... Because it's like, all the police departments, because the cops are passing that stuff around. Your defense attorney, the prosecutor's office, it's going to pass through multiple prosecutors too. Everyone is going to see your wife naked. Yeah. And she's pissed.
Don't get your phone dumped.
But it's bad, right?
Yeah, don't get your phone dumped.
Oof.